Those riders, you think they're fleeing somebody? Chasing them. Calvin squinted down the path before them, behind them, too crooked to see very far in either direction. I don't rightly know, he said. You reckon it's us they're after? Calvin wiped his nose on the sleeve of his coat. They're liable to be after anything they can get their hands on, I reckon. She reached around him with the pistol. Thank you, she said. He nodded and took it back. He lowered the hammer and double-checked that it rested over an empty chamber for riding. Chances were in his favor for that. All but two were empty. Maybe the men of the troop were after them, maybe not. They had loved the colonel as a father almost, a man of great cruelty who nevertheless protected them, led them, eclipsed any guilt of theirs with his own. At his behest they had raised and butchered, no reason but hunger and the colonel's orders. Without them, Calvin wondered what they might do, how viciously they might grab for a new purpose, a new mission, and what better motive than love and vengeance neatly twinned. They had long ago forsaken the war of the newspapers for the one they carried everywhere with them, and which had no colors, no sides, and which could be fit neatly into any new opportunity that presented itself. Ambush, pillage, torture. Outside of Asheville, they had disemboweled a man for attempting to fornicate with a hog. They had bade him carry out the task by his own hand, his own knife into his own white belly, as the colonel said the great Japanese warriors had done, sometimes 30 or 50 at a time, on their knees, all this for disgrace, for letting their master die. The colonel had a word for this, something silly sounding from a book, but no one had laughed. The hogman had been unable to accomplish the deed, hardly pricking his skin, so the men had strung him to a tree and slit him a wide gash below the navel like a mouth. The boy had swallowed the bile that scorched his throat when the man's tubing came spilling onto the ground, wet and blue. He could not appear weak before them, only the boy he was. Their eyes ignited at weakness, sight, or scent. And yet he had always felt protected by them. They had not made him do the things they did, not yet. And for that he felt them almost as brothers to him, elders who rode as killers among the killed and would make him a man to be feared. And what more could a boy ask for in lands like these, in this cold and high place where such men commanded the roads? They rode the same ridge for the rest of the day, no place else to go. The leaves were at their brightest now, curdling and crackling on the black limbs of the trees. He had to wonder why the colors changed so brightly in this land, what made them turn so fire-colored and alive-looking just before they fell. Just like a match struck on the thumb would flare terrifically in a dark room, moment bright, then burn quickly down to a cinder, nothing but dark smudges between a man's fingers. He looked through the slatted trees to the golden ridges beyond. Here or there, a spurt of the brightest otherworldly red marked the hillside, the color explosive, lifting like a hemorrhage from the earth. Calvin looked hard for these sights, and they made him ache. He knew the fallen land was trying to tell him something, and the message yearned in his throat to be spoken, but he would not speak it. When Ava fell asleep on the back of the horse, he took her white hand in his own. Her palm was calloused like a boy's, her finger bones delicate. He placed her hand back in the pocket of his coat, where she kept it warm. They rode sunup to sundown in the following days. They slept in their blankets, and their fires were small and hot burning in a good ways from any no path or road or trail. The ground was cold. They curled themselves close to the embers for warmth, nearly encircling the heat head to head, boots to boots. Ava apportioned the meat in what the men of the company would have called quarter rations, and there was good feed for the horse from the colonel's provisions. At night, Calvin would hobble the horse's forelegs and stake it, and loop a nosebag over its ears, letting it eat. It fed better than they did and probably deserved to. One morning, Calvin woke to a terrible retching. He turned over in his buffalo blanket and saw Ava huddled on her knees before a chestnut tree. Her both hands planted on the trunk, her head hung between her arms, making sick. She cast off the quilt, and her rail-like body quaked beneath the muslin dress. You okay? He asked. She straightened and turned to him. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. It ain't nothing, she said. She stood. Let's get moving. Callum started to say more, but she walked past him to the horse. Day after day they climbed. The land grew colder, harder. Ava was sick sometimes in the mornings, but she never complained. Callum tried to eat less of what was rationed him, but she wouldn't take more. The wind seemed to blow upward out of the valleys here, lifting the leaves from the trees. Somewhere near was the great thrust of rock where the snow was said to fall upside down, rising up out of the gorge below. Where an Indian brave, heartbroken, had leapt into the wilderness, only to be blown back into the arms of his lover. It was known now as an especially bad place for partisan war, for brother against brother, and cutthroat guerrilla bands who rode through the hollers with torch and sword and rope. He and Ava continued on south through the mountains, wherever every grove and deadfall where men could hide. Before sundown, after a long day on the trail, Cal started looking for a place to stop. Ava woke up and looked around, sleepy-eyed. Rock on one side, sheer drop on the other. I don't see a way off this trail, she said. We just got to keep on riding, said Cal. We'll find some place. They rode on. Night fell. Moonlight lit down through the dark fingerlings of the trees that tunneled their path, slinking like quicksilver over the ground. Ava leaned forward, her mouth right over his shoulder, her breath tickling his ear. You know what they say about all this warring? No, said Cal. Bet you're going to tell me, though. They say too many of the dead are going unburied, rotting above ground. Cal straightened in the saddle. He thought of the men unburied, the colonel and the men he himself had shot. He sniffed. That's just how animals die, he said. No way to bury them. Exactly, said Ava. Animals got no way to do it. But we're supposed to be different. We're supposed to bury our dead. They say the spirits don't get home easy if they ain't buried. And pretty soon that could lead to real trouble. The land full of all these haunts, sorely displeased at the meager terms of their departure. I don't know, said Cal. Sounds awful vague to me. Seems like they should have themselves bigger issues to chew on, like being dead. People think the dead are somehow enlightened, but I don't think so. I think they're just like us, petty and mean-spirited mainly, few of them pleasant. Them being dead, they got nothing to do but sour and moan, trying to get somebody to listen to their bitching. Cal watched fragments of moonlight glimmer in the black woods alongside the trail. This your idea of a joke? Because it ain't funny. I'm serious, said Ava, leaning well over his shoulder. Why didn't you tell me to bury the colonel while I'm back at the house? Him? I wanted that son of a bitch to get his fill of eternal bellyache. Rest of them, too. Let him moan. I won't be there to hear it. Callum looked back at her like he would a two-headed woman. Girl, I'm starting to think you might be crazy. She shrugged. Big talk from you, stealing the colonel's horse. That wasn't crazy. I needed the fastest horse, so I took it. Well, the underbrush crackled of a sudden, followed by the high-pitched scream of something not human. Before Callum could even draw the pistol, a sleek shape bounded into the middle of their path, two almond eyes with slit-shaped pupils. Its white fangs caged a small animal, nearly limp, just the tiny paws clawing for air. The horse shuddered and wrenched its head, turning broadside to the big cat, and Callum yanked at the pistol. It caught in the saddle holster. Behind him, Ava rose out of her seat, shooting both arms over her head, outward, her fingers curled claw-like, her black hair haloing her head, and she shrieked at the creature. A shriek high and angry and full of blood, like the reputed shriek of the banshee. The cat sank low to the ground and shot away into the woods, making only 2 or 3 diminishing sounds. Cal got his pistol free and pointed it this way and that, toward where the cat had disappeared. After a moment, he lowered it and half turned on the saddle to look at Ava. He was wide-eyed and slack-jawed when he did, like he was looking at a creature of some unplumbable species. The quilt made her seem huge and yoke-shouldered, and her blazing eyes and smooth face, ovate and hard-boned, struck him silent. Show that son of a bitch, she said, half smiling. Cal nodded slowly, turning back to the trail. "Reckon you did," he said, his mouth dry, his chest thundering. So we thought we'd open it up. If you guys have any questions, be happy to answer those. Well, I'll ask one to myself.
Taylor,
Well, you guys,
Taylor,
yes.
Are you still on your regimen of going to Barnes & Nobles on a very regular basis?
Absolutely. That's kind of my secret. One thing that people ask a lot of times about your writing regimen, and I'm very strict about mine. I go to the same cafe at the same time of day, to the same table every day. Or if that table is taken, I have 2 other tables in descending order of priority that I get. I get one of those, and I kind of bird dog my table and send rays toward whoever's sitting in it that says, "That's my table, get up and leave." And that seems to work pretty well. And I actually have a whole I have co-conspirators that like to read or work up at the Barnes & Noble before me. So sometimes I come in about the same time they leave, and they're like, because everybody wants that. It's the pre-med table right by the window. And then when I'm going to work on a new draft, I work before I go to the office too. And I have an office I go to that I do what I call work, which is non-writing work, which pretty much pays the bills, and I keep things very compartmentalized, for sure. Yes?
How did you come to have the Civil War as your setting?
It kind of chose me, partially because the short story was based on, had a sound of that era to me. There's nothing in it that indicates exactly what era, but there's, horses and revolvers and stuff like that. And 2, growing up, I was actually never as interested in the Civil War as some of my friends. I mean, I knew kids who could rattle off every single battle and where it took place and what year, who won, the major generals involved, et cetera, et cetera. But it was later when I started to learn about not the big battles that we all know, but the kind of the outskirts of the war that really, really interested me. The guerrilla fighting that was going on, living in western North Carolina where I did, where the loyalties were very fractured. It was not clearly, blue and gray. And you had the average citizen who, might live in a cabin, and one day, secessionist guerrillas ride in and want you to feed them and support them and all that stuff. And then the next day, pro-union guerrillas ride in, and you're just stuck in the middle, hoping they don't, take all your hogs before winter comes and you starve to death, And that really felt very, almost contemporary to me. I mean, there was something, and it was just, that was really, really interesting to me. These outskirts, these shadowy edges of the war, and living in a world where you weren't always certain who was your friend and who was your enemy, and there was kind of danger on all sides. And especially in the first half of this book, when they're up in the mountains, it's very much like that. That kind of really drew me in. And I was living up there at the time, so I could really see it. Yes.
I want to thank you for writing this book. I'm an instructor for the Rhodes Scholar Program, and one of my classes was on the war. And most of my students were anywhere from 60 until they were on their way out. And so many of them were not Southern. And so when you try to teach, as you've written, and I'm putting down the book club book, I'm reading this right now. This is the only way a lot of people are going to be educated on the truth.
Right.
And the reality.
Mm-hmm.
It's not hard.
Right.
And so thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the kind words. I really appreciate that. I hope that I, captured the world. I think I said at the beginning, I was trying to capture the world as it was at the time. Certainly not a history book, but I certainly did my research to make sure that there's kind of an underlying substrate of the history that's pretty accurate. Yes?
Taylor, coming from this beautiful place, how did you come to write so well about your evil characters? How did you come to know?
That's a good question. I think that part of it was living in Nashville. I mean, we were when we lived in that house. It's a funny story now, but we were living in fear, and there were kind of hooded and cloaked characters going around that were, meth was a big drug.